tell us your parents' names and where they were born, and where you were born.
I hate to admit that. You know where I was born?
Lady of Lords?
Chislehurst.
In Chislehurst.
In the hospital there?
No. What do you want?
So tell us the names of your parents.
Right.
Are you going to tell us?
Oh, you want I'm on camera? I'm just sorry. Both of my parents were born in Italy, really the island of Sicily. My mother's maiden name was Lisa, and she had 3 brothers. But she and her mother, which was my grandmother, Leah, came to America when my mother, Josephine, was 12 years old. And she had 1 brother with her, which is my Uncle Joe Lisa, who was 3 or 4 at the time. And then there were 2 other children, Frank and Austin Lisa, who were born in America. She came from the village of Toboda, T-O-B-O-D-A, in Sicily, which was up a mountainside. And my father, Antonio Maressa, came from the town of Messina in Sicily. And he had 4 sisters and I think 4 or 5 brothers. And there's only 3 or 4 of them that are left in Italy, Sicily yet today. 2 or 3 of them went to South America. One of them settled in Australia, but my father was the only one who settled in America. My mother married Austin Maressa. Am I to keep going on or not?
Yeah.
My mother married Austin Maressa, who was my father's cousin, and she met him in America. And at that time, as immigrants in Philadelphia, they lived down what is known as Christian Street. And he was working on a railroad, and he hurt himself in the leg, and I suppose doctors and medical knowledge at that time wasn't as well known as we know it today. And they amputated his foot off at the ankle, but then the infection continued, and they amputated his leg at the knee, and then they amputated it again at the hip, and he died from gangrene, whatever the causes were. So at that time, my mother and her first husband, Austin Maressa, were running a boarding home in Philadelphia for immigrant Italians. And then my father...
How many children did Austin and your mother have?
They had 3. They had my brother Jake, they had my sister Mabel, and they had my brother Louis, whose real name is Julius, but we always called him Louis. So then she continued with the 3 children and running the boarding house. But in Philadelphia at that time, there was a very strong group we know today as the Mafia, the Black Hand or what. And at that time, my mother has told us in past history that they would get young widows, attractive young widows and young girls, and try to get them into the slave market, which was, they used to call it white slavery, which was to take these young women and force them into prostitution. So my mother came away from Philadelphia and came to South Jersey, and she settled in Swedesboro and got a job with the railroad company. And it was at that time when my father came from Italy that he came and looked up his cousin's wife. And then they got to know each other, and also in those days it was not very nice for a widow to remarry. They just had a stigma about it, but she agreed to remarry because she didn't have to change her surname. And from my mother and father, there are 5 of us. There was my sister Franny, who was the oldest, Frank, Joseph, myself, and my younger sister Stella. But they have all passed on, and the only ones left today are Jake and Franny, Frank, Joe, and Leah. There's 4 of us left. 5 of us left. 3 boys and 2 girls. We don't get together as often as we'd like to, but we were together, you know, during the holidays, and we were together last Sunday.
What town in Italy was your father from?
Messina. It's a city. It was a city.
And his name is Antonio.
Antonio.
And he died in 1959.
Yes, 67.
November the 13th.
Yeah, November the 13th, 1959.
And your mother died in 1976.
She was 80 years old and she died of a stroke.
I remember.
And she stayed in the hospital a month, and the type of stroke she had, she could hear us, but she had lost the capability of talking or moving her head or arms or anything. And we really were very upset at her going, because she had the kind of a character and disposition that we honestly thought that she would probably go on forever. And I can remember saying that when we said goodbye at the funeral parlor, that, you know, I just really thought she would go on forever. I think my grandchildren, you included, Billy, knew her very well.
I remember her very well.
Yeah, you do remember
her once.
Yeah.
Yeah. We said house too with us.
Yes, yes.
Who lives in there now?
My brother Joe has it rented.
Oh.
After my father died, and my brother Joe, who professionally was very successful, and family, he always shared everything he had, and he built a beautiful home, you remember, for my mother. And that was her first time that she went back to Italy. And then she took trips every year thereafter until her health no longer allowed her to go.
What about you, Dad?
Put your hand down.
I had to stop and think.
Oh my. I could have went on another hour.
I know you could. Well, we may still get it on. Your father's name, where was he born? His parents' name?
My father's name was Chalmer, and his father's name, which is my grandfather's name, was John. And he passed away when my father was 13. And my grandmother, which is my father's mother, her name was Mary, and she died when my father was 14. In fact, I never seen any of my grandparents. The only one I can faintly remember was my mother's mother, which is, I only remember her first name, her was Carlson.
Amelia.
Was Amelia Carlson. And they lived with us in Indiana, in the little town of Austin, where I was born and raised at. And my mother was born in Bern, Indiana. My father was born in Bern, Indiana. And he settled in Austin after his stepmother, and they moved to Austin. They lived on a farm, which was approximately a mile and a half from the small town of Austin. And my father was raised on a farm, and then we, during the Depression, my father was what they call a sharecropper. And in 1938, we moved to town, and that's where we lived. We lived in 3 different places in this little town of Austin. And then my mother passed away in March the 23rd, 1940. It was a week after my 16th birthday. And my father remarried. He remarried twice after that, but then he got into hauling milk. And he spent his last few years with me in New Jersey. He lived to be 71.
Phil, I think it's interesting to know that your mother was of a family of 8 people, 7 girls and 1 boy.
And you don't know where any of them are?
They're all in the Vincennes area.
The Vincennes and in Kentucky area. He never kept...
My Aunt Alma died. She was from Tennessee.
But you never kept in touch with him.
There was only 2
Phil, wasn't your grandmother Jenny Glass? Mary was your father's second wife. Mary was your father's second wife, Mary. We lived with her.
My father.
when your father remarried and we went to Indiana and we stayed with him. Do you remember that in Fort Wayne?
Her name was William.
You're right. But wasn't your father, like John and Jenny Glass, divorced before he was born?
No.
Yes, they were. No?
I'm going to stop for now. It's fabulous to have all this on film.
Because my father, he didn't have
John.
any parents. By the time he was 13 years old.
Yeah, but